The $500 fine notice taped to my front door was still fluttering in the Arizona heat when I ripped it off, my hands already shaking with a mixture of confusion and rage. I had been living in this Sun Valley subdivision outside Phoenix for 3 years without a single complaint, and now suddenly the HOA was claiming my backup generator was violating noise ordinances. The thing only ran during power outages, which in the scorching summers of 2025 were becoming more frequent as the grid struggled to keep up with demand. I crumpled the paper in my fist and stormed back inside, already mentally composing the email I would send to dispute this absolute nonsense. My name is Brandon Kovac, and I am a freelance software developer who works from home. The generator wasn't some luxury item, it was a necessity. When the power went out, I lost internet, air conditioning, and the ability to meet my deadlines. The 12,000-watt Generac sat in a specially built enclosure on the side of my house, positioned exactly according to the manufacturer's specifications and local building codes. I had even paid extra for the sound dampening package, which reduced the noise to about 65 decibels at 20 feet, roughly the volume of a normal conversation. I read through the fine notice again, trying to make sense of it. According to the document signed by Patricia Mendoza, the HOA president, multiple neighbors had complained about excessive and unreasonable noise pollution from my generator during all hours of day and night. That was the first thing that made me pause. All hours? The generator only kicked on automatically when the power failed, and while we had experienced a few outages this summer, they were sporadic at best. There was no way it was running constantly. I walked outside and circled around to where the generator sat. The unit was housed in a cream-colored aluminum enclosure that matched my house's stucco exterior. I opened the access panel and checked the hour meter, something I did periodically for maintenance purposes. My jaw dropped. The meter read 347 hours. I had checked it just 2 months ago during the last scheduled maintenance, and it had been at 93 hours. That meant the generator had run for 254 additional hours in just 8 weeks. That was impossible. We had maybe 3 or 4 power outages in that time, none lasting more than a couple hours. Even being generous, the generator should have accumulated maybe 15 additional hours at most. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my emails, looking for the automatic alerts the generator was supposed to send me whenever it started up. There were only 4 messages in the past 2 months, corresponding exactly to the outages I remembered. Something was very wrong. I knelt down and examined the generator more closely. The fuel gauge showed it was nearly empty, which was also strange because I'd filled the propane tank just a month ago. At normal usage, that tank should have lasted me at least 6 months. I traced the power cables coming from the unit, following them to the transfer switch mounted on the exterior wall. Everything looked normal there, but then I noticed something odd. There was a second conduit running from near the generator, partially hidden behind some decorative river rocks I had placed around the enclosure. Getting down on my hands and knees in the 100-degree heat, I pushed aside the landscaping rocks and followed the conduit. It ran along the ground, carefully buried under a thin layer of gravel, and headed toward the back corner of my property. My house backed up to the community recreation area, which included a pool, clubhouse, and tennis courts. The conduit disappeared under the cinder block wall that separated my yard from the HOA common area. My heart was pounding now. I went back inside, grabbed a screwdriver and my phone flashlight, and returned to investigate further. The conduit was professional grade, not something a homeowner would typically use for a DIY project. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make this installation look legitimate. I tried to trace where it connected to my generator system, and that is when I found it. Hidden behind the main electrical panel coming from the generator was a splice with a secondary line running to that mysterious conduit. Someone had tapped into my generator. They were stealing my power. I stood up, brushing the dirt off my jeans, my mind racing. The HOA had been drawing power from my generator without my knowledge or permission. That explained why the unit was running so much more than it should, why I was going through propane at an alarming rate, and why the hour meter was so high. But it did not explain why they would fine me for noise if they were the ones benefiting from the generator running. Unless that was exactly the point. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Derek Martinez, who lived 2 houses down. Derek was a retired electrician and one of the few people in the neighborhood I actually trusted. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey Brandon, what's up?" "Derek, I need your expert opinion on something electrical. Are you home?" "Yeah, just watching the game. Come on over." I explained the situation to Derek while standing in his kitchen, showing him photos I had taken of the conduit and the splice. His expression grew darker as I talked. "That's theft, plain and simple," he said, zooming in on one of the photos. "And it's dangerous. If they're pulling power without proper load calculations, they could damage your generator or cause a fire. You need to report this to who, the HOA?" Derek snorted. The people who are stealing from you? No, you need to call the police and file a report. And you should probably get a lawyer too. This is serious, Brandon. I thanked Derek and headed home, but instead of calling the police right away, I decided I needed more evidence. If the HOA was going to try to find me, I wanted to have an ironclad case showing exactly what they had done. I set up my phone to record video and documented everything: the conduit, the splice, the hour meter, and the propane tank levels. Then I went inside and started researching. It took about an hour of digging through property records and HOA documents, but I found something interesting. The recreation center, which the mysterious conduit was running toward, had been cited by the county 6 months ago for electrical code violations. According to the public records, there were issues with the pool house's electrical system, and the HOA had been given 90 days to correct them or face fines and potential closure of the facility. I pulled up the HOA's financial statements, which were required by Arizona law to be made available to homeowners. The budget showed a line item for electrical repairs to the recreation center for $25,000. But according to the meeting minutes from 3 months ago, the board had voted to delay the repairs due to budget constraints. They had decided to allocate that money to landscaping instead, specifically to install new trees along the main entrance to enhance property values. The picture was becoming clearer. The HOA had a problem with the recreation center's electrical system, but rather than fix it properly, they had found a cheaper solution. They tapped into my generator, which would provide backup power to keep the pool house and clubhouse running during outages. But my generator was not just running during outages, it was running constantly, providing primary power to at least part of their facility. I checked my electric bill from the past few months. My usage had actually gone down slightly, which made sense if the generator was supplementing my home's power during peak hours. But I had paid for all that propane out of my own pocket. At current prices, I had probably spent close to $800 in fuel costs over the past 2 months alone, all to power HOA facilities. The fine notice suddenly made perfect sense. The HOA needed a paper trail showing that my generator was a problem, probably to cover themselves if anyone started asking questions about why it was running so much. If neighbors complained to the city about noise, the HOA could point to their documentation showing they had already fined me and were addressing the issue. It was a preemptive cover-up. I was furious, but I forced myself to think strategically. If I confronted Patricia Mendoza now, she would just deny everything and possibly destroy evidence. I needed to catch them in the act and document their theft comprehensively enough that they could not talk their way out of it. The next morning, I called a licensed electrician named Tom Chen, whose company had good reviews online. I did not mention anything about theft, just told him I wanted a complete inspection of my generator system because I was concerned about unexpected fuel consumption. Tom arrived that afternoon, a friendly guy in his 40s with a clipboard and a serious-looking multimeter. It took him about 30 minutes to discover the illegal tap. "Holy cow," Tom said, crouched next to the generator. "Someone really knew what they were doing here. This is a professional installation, but it's completely unauthorized. You see this junction here? They've got a 50-amp line running off your system. That's enough to power a small building. Can you tell if it's currently drawing power?" Tom attached his multimeter to various points on the connection. "Oh yeah, it's hot right now. You're providing about 32 amps to whatever is on the other end of this line. That is a significant load. Can you trace where it goes? Not without digging up your yard, but based on the direction, I'd say it's heading to whatever is behind that wall." Tom stood up and wiped his hands. "Look, Brandon, I have to tell you that this is illegal as hell. This is theft of services at minimum, possibly criminal tampering with electrical systems. You need to report this to the police and to Arizona Public Service. If someone gets hurt because of this unauthorized connection, you could potentially be held liable since it's on your property. Even though I didn't install it, your property, your generator, your liability. That is how they will see it initially, until you can prove you had no knowledge of it. That is why you need to report it now." Tom pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. "I'm going to write up a formal inspection report documenting all of this. You will want that for your records. And Brandon, do not touch that connection. Leave it exactly as it is until the authorities document it." I paid Tom for his time and his report, which he promised to email me by end of day. Then I did what I should have done the moment I discovered the tap. I called the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, probably because theft of electricity is not exactly a common crime, but she took down my information and said an officer would be by within a few hours to take a report. While I waited, I decided to do a little more investigating. I grabbed a ladder from my garage and positioned it near the back wall. From the top of the ladder, I could see over into the HOA recreation area. The pool house was a single-story building with changing rooms, bathrooms, and a small kitchenette. There was also a larger clubhouse building used for community events. I could see several air conditioning units running on the roof of the pool house, working hard in the midday heat. What caught my attention was a small junction box mounted on the back wall of the pool house, directly in line with where the conduit from my property would emerge. The box had a conduit running into it from below ground level. I took several photos with my phone's zoom lens. The police officer, a young woman named Officer Sarah Reeves, arrived around 3 in the afternoon. I walked her through everything I had discovered, showed her Tom Chen's inspection report, and provided copies of all my documentation. She took extensive notes and photographs. "This is actually more complex than a typical theft case," Officer Reeves explained. "Because it involves an HOA, there are specific statutes that might apply. I'm going to have to consult with our white-collar crime unit. In the meantime, I'm filing this as theft of services and criminal damage to property." "Do you have any idea how long this has been going on?" "Based on my generator's hour meter, probably at least 2 months, maybe longer." "And the HOA fined you for noise?" "Just yesterday." I showed her the fine notice. Officer Reeves shook her head. "That's potentially witness tampering or obstruction, trying to discourage you from complaining about the noise that their own theft was causing. This keeps getting worse for them." She handed me a case number. "I'll be in touch. In the meantime, do not confront anyone from the HOA about this. Let us handle it." That evening, I got an email from Patricia Mendoza, the HOA president. The subject line read, "Generator violation, immediate action required." The email informed me that I had 14 days to either remove the generator or install additional sound dampening to bring it into compliance with community standards. Failure to comply would result in additional fines of $100 per day until the violation was corrected. I forwarded the email to Officer Reeves without responding to Patricia. The next few days were tense. I kept waiting for someone from the HOA to notice that I had discovered their tap, but everything remained quiet. The generator continued running, and I continued documenting everything. I checked the hour meter daily and kept detailed logs of my propane consumption. On Thursday, I received a call from Detective Marcus Williams from the Phoenix PD's Financial Crimes Unit. He wanted to meet with me to discuss the case. We arranged to meet at my house Friday morning. Detective Williams was a tall black man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor. He brought along someone from Arizona Public Service, the local utility company, a field supervisor named Jennifer Kowalski. Jennifer had brought some serious-looking equipment. "Mr. Kovac, I have reviewed Officer Reeves' report and the documentation you provided," Detective Williams said. "This appears to be a clear case of theft, but I want to make sure we have all our ducks in a row before we proceed. Ms. Kowalski here is going to help us trace exactly where your power is going and how much is being stolen." Jennifer spent about an hour using specialized equipment to map the electrical flow from my generator. She was able to confirm that the unauthorized line was currently drawing an average of 30 amps, and based on the generator's hour meter and my fuel consumption, had been doing so fairly consistently for at least 10 weeks. "At current electricity rates, you've provided approximately 630 kilowatt hours to whoever is on the other end of that line," Jennifer calculated. "That is worth about $75 in electricity. But that does not account for your fuel costs, equipment wear and tear, or the fact that they're stealing a service. The actual damages are much higher." Detective Williams nodded. "Here is what is going to happen. I am going to get a warrant to access the HOA recreation area and trace that line to its destination. Once we can prove exactly what they are powering with your generator, we will have enough for criminal charges. In the meantime, I need you to keep documenting everything, but do not say anything to the HOA." "They're threatening me with more fines," I said. "Let them. Every action they take to try to intimidate you into shutting down the generator they're stealing from just makes the case stronger. We are looking at theft, fraud, possibly conspiracy if multiple board members were involved. This is serious." The warrant came through on Monday. Detective Williams called me that morning and asked me to meet him at the recreation center at 2 p.m. When I arrived, there were already 2 patrol cars in the parking lot, along with Jennifer from APS and Tom Chen, my electrician. Patricia Mendoza was there too, looking furious. She was a woman in her mid-50s with an overly styled blonde bob and the kind of expression that suggested she was used to getting her way. Standing next to her was the HOA's vice president, a nervous-looking man named Gary Schultz, and their lawyer, a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Rachel Simmons. "This is outrageous," Patricia was saying to Detective Williams. "You cannot just barge into HOA property without notice. We have members using these facilities." "This is private property. Madam, I have a warrant signed by a judge that says I absolutely can." Detective Williams replied calmly. "Now, you can either cooperate with this investigation or you can be charged with obstruction of justice. Your choice." Rachel Simmons, the lawyer, put a hand on Patricia's arm. "Let's just see what this is about." We all walked to the back of the pool house. where Jennifer and Tom began tracing the conduit from the junction box I had spotted from my ladder. It took about 20 minutes of work, but they were able to confirm that the line from my property was feeding directly into the pool house's electrical panel, specifically providing power to the HVAC system and the outdoor lighting. This installation was done by a professional, Tom noted. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. This is not amateur work. Detective Williams turned to Patricia. Ms. Mendoza, do you have any knowledge of this electrical connection? Patricia's face had gone pale. I have no idea what you are talking about. This is the first I am seeing of any of this. Really? Because according to HOA meeting minutes, there was discussion 3 months ago about electrical problems with this facility. The board voted to delay repairs and redirect that budget money to landscaping. That is completely different. We had some minor code violations that we are addressing through proper channels. Jennifer from APS spoke up. Madam, this is not a minor code violation. This is an illegal tap into a private generator. Someone deliberately installed this to steal power. And based on the equipment used and the quality of the installation, this cost several $1,000s to set up. Someone authorized this work. Rachel Simmons was looking increasingly worried. Detective, my clients are willing to cooperate fully with your investigation. If there has been some sort of mistake or unauthorized work done, we want to get to the bottom of it just as much as you do. Then I will need to see all HOA financial records related to work done on this facility in the past 6 months. I will also need the names and contact information for any contractors who have done electrical work here. Patricia started to object, but Rachel cut her off. We will provide everything you need, Detective. Over the next week, the investigation expanded rapidly. Detective Williams discovered that Patricia had personally authorized payment to a contractor named Southwest Electric Solutions for what was described in the HOA records as emergency electrical repairs to the recreation center. The payment was for $8,000. Paid 5 months ago, the problem was that Southwest Electric Solutions did not exist. It was a shell company, and the check had been deposited into an account that traced back to Patricia's brother-in-law, Martin Harper, who did have an electrical contractor's license but whose company was called Harper Electrical Services. When Detective Williams interviewed Martin, he initially tried to lie, but when faced with bank records and the threat of felony charges, he admitted that Patricia had hired him to tap into my generator. She had told him that the HOA had an easement allowing them to use my power, and that I had been informed and agreed to it. Martin claimed he had no idea it was theft. She paid me $5,000 to do the installation, Martin admitted in his statement. I thought it was weird, but Patricia showed me some HOA documents that looked official. I figured it was some kind of special arrangement. When I asked why we were not just running a line from the main grid, she said something about backup power requirements, and that this was the most cost-effective solution approved by the board. The other 3 board members, when interviewed, all claimed they had no knowledge of the tap. Gary Schultz, the vice president, said Patricia had told the board that she had negotiated a special arrangement with me to provide backup power to the recreation center in exchange for reduced HOA dues. When Detective Williams checked my dues payment history, he found no reduction. I had been paying the full amount the entire time. The treasurer, a retired accountant named Linda Foster, was particularly helpful. She had questioned the payment to Southwest Electric Solutions because it was not a vendor she recognized. Patricia had told her it was a subsidiary company of a larger firm and that they had given the HOA a special discount. Linda had been suspicious but had not pushed the issue because Patricia had presented what appeared to be a proper invoice in W-9 form, both of which turned out to be fraudulent. By the end of the 2nd week, the case was solid. Patricia Mendoza was arrested on charges of theft, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and filing false documents. Martin Harper was charged as an accomplice, though his lawyer was already negotiating a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against Patricia. The HOA immediately held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Gary Schultz took over temporarily, and one of his first acts was to send me a formal letter apologizing for what had happened and informing me that all fines against me were being rescinded. But I was not done. The theft of my power was one thing, but I had also incurred real damages. My propane cost alone totaled over $1,200. My generator had run for hundreds of unnecessary hours, reducing its lifespan and requiring additional maintenance, and I had spent countless hours dealing with this mess, time I could have been working. I hired a lawyer, a sharp attorney named Daniel Brennan, who specialized in HOA disputes. Daniel sent a formal demand letter to the HOA requesting $15,000 in damages broken down to include my fuel costs, generator maintenance and depreciation, legal fees, lost work time, and emotional distress. The HOA's insurance company initially balked at the amount, but when Daniel pointed out that we could also sue for punitive damages and that the criminal case made liability clear-cut, They agreed to settle for $12,000. The settlement also included a provision that the HOA would pay to have the illegal tap properly removed, and my electrical system inspected and certified by a licensed electrician. The criminal case moved forward slowly, as these things do. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president, and therefore the HOA itself should bear responsibility, not her personally. The prosecutor was not buying it. Patricia had created a fake company, forged documents, and pocketed $3,000 of the $8,000 she had claimed to pay for the work. That was straight-up embezzlement on top of the theft. In March of 2026, almost a year after I first discovered the illegal tap, Patricia Mendoza pleaded guilty to theft, fraud, and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA for the embezzled funds and to me for my damages. Martin Harper pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received probation plus a fine. The fallout for the HOA was significant. Several homeowners filed a class action lawsuit arguing that the board's mismanagement had reduced property values and created liability for all members. The HOA's insurance premiums skyrocketed. 3 more board members resigned, unable to handle the stress and negative attention. The recreation center's electrical system was finally repaired properly, at a cost of $32,000. Covered by a special assessment that every homeowner had to pay. My assessment was waived as part of the settlement. I stayed in the house for another year, but the whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. The neighborhood that had seemed so perfect when I moved in now felt tainted by corruption and mismanagement. In the spring of 2027, I sold the house and moved to a property in Scottsdale with no HOA at all. But before I left, I made sure to attend one last HOA meeting. The new board president, a retired teacher named Margaret Collins who actually seemed to care about doing things right, asked if I wanted to say a few words. I stood up and looked around the room at my soon-to-be former neighbors. Some of them had supported me throughout the ordeal. Others had been quick to believe Patricia's lies and had treated me like I was the problem. I chose my words carefully. When I bought my house here 3 years ago, I thought I was joining a community, I said. I believed that the HOA existed to maintain our property values and ensure everyone followed reasonable rules. What I learned was that any organization, no matter how small, can be corrupted when the wrong people are in charge and when good people fail to ask questions. I paused, making eye contact with Linda Foster, the treasurer who had questioned that suspicious payment but had not pushed hard enough. Patricia Mendoza stole from me, but she also stole from all of you. She embezzled your dues, she created liability that cost everyone money, and she damaged the reputation of this community. She was able to do that because not enough people were paying attention. My hope is that going forward you will all be more engaged, ask more questions, and hold your leaders accountable, because if you do not, it will happen again. There was silence when I sat down, and then Margaret started clapping. Others joined in, though not everyone. I did not care. I had said what I needed to say. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me for pursuing the case against Patricia. Derek Martinez, my electrician neighbor who had helped me from the beginning, shook my hand. "You did good, Brandon," he said. "Most people would have just paid the fine and moved on. You stood up for yourself and probably prevented Patricia from doing worse down the line. It was not about revenge," I told him. "I just wanted things to be fair." That's more than most people can say. As I drove home from that final meeting, I reflected on everything that had happened. The whole ordeal had started with a simple fine notice, an unjust accusation that had made me angry enough to investigate. If I had just accepted it and paid, Patricia would still be stealing power, still be embezzling money, and still be bullying homeowners into compliance. The fact that my generator, the very thing I had installed to protect my livelihood during power outages, had been turned into a tool for someone else's theft seemed almost poetic. Patricia had gotten greedy, thinking she could solve the HOA's problems by secretly siphoning power from me, while simultaneously covering her tracks by making me look like the bad guy. What she had not counted on was someone actually checking their generator's hour meter, someone who noticed the details that did not add up. She had assumed, like many petty tyrants, that people would not question authority or look too closely at the official story. The generator itself was still running fine, despite the extra wear and tear. I had it serviced thoroughly after the illegal tap was removed, and the technician assured me it was in good shape. It had done its job, keeping my house powered during outages, and inadvertently, providing the evidence I needed to expose corruption. I thought about all the HOA horror stories I had heard over the years, the tales of petty rules and power-hungry board members making life miserable for homeowners. My situation had been worse than most because it involved actual criminal behavior. But the underlying dynamic was the same. People given a small amount of power over their neighbors, without proper oversight or accountability, would sometimes abuse that power. The legal system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. Patricia was held accountable. I received compensation for my damages. The HOA was forced to clean house and implement better oversight procedures. Justice in a practical sense had been served, but there were costs beyond the financial. The stress of the investigation, the months of uncertainty, the confrontations with neighbors who thought I was making a big deal over nothing, all of that had taken a toll. I had learned that doing the right thing was not always easy or pleasant, even when you were clearly in the right. My new house in Scottsdale was smaller than the one I had left, but it sat on 2 acres with no neighbors close enough to complain about anything. There was no HOA to answer to, no architectural review committee to approve my landscaping choices, and no one who could find me for painting my door the wrong color. The property taxes were higher, but the freedom was worth it. I kept my generator, of course. It made the move with me and was installed in a new enclosure, this time with a locked access panel and a security camera pointed at it. I was not taking any chances. The propane tank was also fitted with a locking cap. Some might call it paranoid, but I called it learning from experience. Detective Williams stayed in touch for a while after the case closed. He told me that the investigation into Patricia had uncovered other questionable financial dealings during her time as HOA president. Nothing else rose to the level of criminal charges, but there were a lot of payments to vendors who had given her kickbacks, inflated invoices, and other petty corruption. The HOA ended up recovering about $20,000 through civil litigation against various contractors who had overcharged them. Tom Chen, the electrician who had inspected my generator and documented the illegal tap, later told me that he had been called to testify in another case where an HOA in Tempe had been accused of similar misconduct. Apparently, my case had opened eyes to the fact that HOAs, with their large budgets and limited oversight, were vulnerable to this kind of fraud. "You started something," Tom said when we ran into each other at a hardware store. "People are asking more questions now. Other HOAs are implementing better audit procedures. You made a difference." I appreciated the sentiment, but I had never set out to be some kind of crusader against HOA corruption. I had just wanted to protect my property and my rights. The broader impact was a side effect, though not an unwelcome one. The insurance settlement money helped offset the costs of moving and gave me a cushion while I rebuilt my client base in the new location. Some of my clients had been understanding about the disruptions caused by the investigation, but others had moved on to different developers. It took about 6 months to get back to where I had been financially. Through it all, my generator continued to do its job. It kicked on during monsoon season when thunderstorms knocked out power to my area. It ran quietly in its sound-dampened enclosure, providing the electricity I needed to keep working, to keep my refrigerator running, to keep my air conditioning going in the brutal Arizona heat. It was just a machine, doing what it was designed to do, but it had become a symbol of something larger in my mind. That generator represented self-sufficiency and the importance of questioning authority. It reminded me that sometimes the systems we rely on fail, whether those are electrical grids or community organizations, and that we need to be prepared to stand on our own. It also reminded me that paying attention to details like checking an hour meter or reviewing a propane bill could reveal truths that others wanted to keep hidden. I never saw Patricia Mendoza again after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she served 14 months of her 18-month sentence and was released early for good behavior. Her husband divorced her while she was in jail, and she moved out of state to live with her sister in Nevada. The house she had lived in was sold to cover her legal debts and restitution payments. Martin Harper, her brother-in-law and accomplice, lost his electrical contractor's license as part of his plea agreement. Last I heard, he was working as a maintenance supervisor at a shopping mall, a considerable step down from running his own business. His cooperation against Patricia had saved him from jail time, but his reputation in the industry was destroyed. The Sun Valley subdivision eventually recovered from the scandal. Property values dipped for about a year but then rebounded as the new HOA board proved to be competent and honest. Margaret Collins served 2 terms as president before stepping down, and the board implemented term limits and financial audits to prevent future abuse. I sometimes drove past the old neighborhood when I had business in that part of Phoenix. The new trees that Patricia had insisted on planting with the money that should have gone to electrical repairs were growing nicely. The recreation center was always busy with families using the pool and tennis courts. From the outside, everything looked normal and peaceful, a pleasant suburban community like thousands of others across America. But I knew the truth that lurked beneath that pleasant surface. I knew that the pool house lights and air conditioning, which now ran on properly installed and legally obtained electricity, had once been powered by theft. I knew that a woman who had been trusted with authority over her neighbors had betrayed that trust for money and convenience. I knew that if I had not paid attention, if I had not checked that hour meter and followed the evidence wherever it led, Patricia would still be there, still stealing, still lying, still abusing her power. The whole experience changed how I looked at authority in general. I became more skeptical of official explanations, more likely to verify things for myself rather than just trusting what I was told. I read my HOA documents more carefully before buying my new property, even though it turned out not to have an HOA. I checked references for contractors exhaustively. I documented everything important and kept careful records. Some might say I became cynical, but I preferred to think of it as becoming realistic. Most people are honest, most organizations function properly, and most of the time the system works. But not always, and the exceptions can be costly if you are not prepared for them. My generator still sits in its enclosure behind my Scottsdale house, ready to power my home when the grid fails. The hour meter now accurately reflects only the hours it has run for my benefit, providing backup power during the outages that are an inevitable part of life in the Arizona desert. The propane tank lasts as long as it should. Nobody is stealing from me, but sometimes, on quiet evenings when I am working late, and I hear the generator kick on because a monsoon storm has knocked out power to my area, I think about Patricia Mendoza. I wonder if she ever thinks about the scheme that seemed so clever at the time, the plan that must have felt foolproof when she was implementing it. I wonder if she realizes that her downfall came not from some sophisticated investigation or whistleblower, but from something as simple as a homeowner checking his hour meter. The lesson, if there is one, is that corruption often contains the seeds of its own destruction. Patricia's theft required my generator to run constantly, which created noise that she then tried to blame on me. But that noise, and the discrepancy between when the generator should have been running and when it actually was running, led me to investigate. Her attempt to cover up the theft by fining me is what motivated me to look closely enough to discover it. If she had just stolen the power quietly, without the fine notice, I might never have noticed. My generator running more than expected might have been attributed to more frequent power outages. The propane consumption could have been written off as a price increase or a leak. But Patricia got greedy and arrogant, thinking she could punish me for the consequences of her own crime. That arrogance is what ultimately brought her down, and it is a pattern I have seen repeated in countless stories of white-collar crime. The perpetrator starts to believe they are smarter than everyone else, that they can manipulate the system perfectly, that they will never be caught. They get comfortable, they get sloppy, and eventually someone notices something that does not add up. In my case, I was that someone. An ordinary homeowner with no special investigative skills or legal training, just someone who paid attention to details and refused to accept an unjust accusation without fighting back. That is all it took to unravel Patricia's scheme and expose the corruption that had infected my HOA. The experience taught me that ordinary people have more power than they often realize. We are not helpless against those who abuse authority. We can ask questions, demand answers, gather evidence, and pursue justice through proper channels. It is not always easy and it is not always quick, but it is possible. I kept copies of all the documents from my case, hundreds of pages of police reports, inspection records, financial statements, and legal filings. Sometimes I pull them out and review them, reminding myself of how far the investigation went and how many people were ultimately involved. What started with me checking an hour meter ended with criminal convictions, civil settlements, insurance claims, and reforms to HOA governance procedures. The ripple effects extended far beyond my personal situation. The media coverage of Patricia's case led to proposed legislation in the Arizona state legislature to increase oversight of HOA finances and require independent audits for communities above a certain size. I even testified before a committee, explaining how the lack of transparency and accountability had allowed the theft to continue for months. Not all of the proposed reforms passed, but some did. HOAs in Arizona now face stricter requirements for financial reporting, and board members can be held personally liable for fraudulent actions taken in their official capacity. It is a small step but a meaningful one. Looking back, I can trace a direct line from that fine notice fluttering on my door to all of these changes. Patricia Mendoza wanted to silence complaints about a problem she had created. Instead, she set in motion a series of events that exposed her crimes, ended her freedom, and led to reforms that will affect HOA governance for years to come. My generator, that humble backup power source, played a starring role in this drama. It was the victim of the theft, the source of the noise complaints, the evidence that something was wrong, and ultimately the proof that convicted the perpetrators. It is still running fine years later, having survived its ordeal with nothing more than some extra maintenance and a new security system. I am running fine too. The stress and anger that consumed me during the investigation have faded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that justice was served, and a deeper understanding of how important it is to stand up for yourself when you know you are right. The financial compensation was nice, but the real value was in proving that one person, acting alone but supported by honest professionals and a functioning legal system, could take on institutional corruption and win. The Sun Valley subdivision has moved on from the scandal. New homeowners have moved in who never knew Patricia Mendoza or heard about the generator theft except as a piece of neighborhood history. The HOA functions normally now, with boring meetings about landscaping budgets and pool maintenance schedules. That is how it should be. And I am here in Scottsdale on my 2 acres with no HOA to answer to, with my generator standing guard against power outages and my skepticism standing guard against anyone who might try to take advantage of me again. I learned my lessons well from that experience, and I will not forget them. The generator hums when it runs, a steady mechanical sound that I have come to find reassuring rather than annoying. It is the sound of self-sufficiency, of being prepared, of having the power to keep working and living even when the grid fails. It is also a reminder that power, whether electrical or political, should never be taken for granted or allowed to be abused without consequences. Patricia Mendoza learned that lesson the hard way in a county jail cell. I learned it too, but from the other side, as the victim who refused to stay silent and who pursued accountability until it was achieved. We both came away from the experience changed, though in very different ways. My generator keeps running, doing its job, waiting for the next outage. And I keep working, keep living, keep remembering that sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention to the details and refuse to accept injustice, even when it comes in the form of a $500 fine notice taped to your door.